It was just another ordinary day at the university when something out of the ordinary happened. Members of the teaching staff, a physicist, a law professor, a political science professor, a chemist, and a statistician, all found themselves in an office together. They were discussing a particularly thorny problem when they suddenly noticed that the trash can in the corner of the room was on fire. The political science professor immediately sprang into action, declaring confidently, "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything," before rushing out of the room. The other professors looked at each other nervously, wondering what to do next. The physicist was the first to speak up. "We must put the garbage can in the fridge," he declared, "so that the temperature will be below the ignition temperature and therefore put itself out." The chemist shook his head. "No, we must cover the garbage can," he said, "so that the fire consumes all of the oxygen, and in the absence of reactants, it can no longer continue." The law professor frowned. "Please, stop blaming the victim," he declared. "You have yet to prove the can is indeed on fire." While they were debating the best course of action, they suddenly noticed that the statistician was running around the room, setting everything else on fire. "What the heck are you doing?" they screamed at him. The statistician stopped for a moment to catch his breath before replying, "Getting a proper sample size." Early one morning, a drunk man who smelled like beer stumbled onto a subway train and sat down next to a priest. The man's tie was stained, his face was plastered with red lipstick, and a half-empty bottle of gin was sticking out of his torn coat pocket. He opened a newspaper and began reading. After a few minutes, the man turned to the priest and asked, "Say, Father, what causes arthritis?" The priest replies, "My son, it's caused by loose living, being with cheap and wicked women, too much alcohol, contempt for your fellow man, and the lack of hygiene." The drunk man muttered in response, "Well, who knew?" then returned to his paper. The priest, thinking about what he had said, nudged the man and apologized. "I'm very sorry. I didn't mean to come on so strong." "How long have you had arthritis?" the drunk answered. "I don't have it, Father. I was just reading here that the Queen does." Don Carlos is 90 years old, and he lives in an old-age retirement nursing home. Every night, after dinner, he secludes himself at the far end of the garden. One night, Juanita, 80 years old, approaches him. They start chatting about life at old age, and after a while he says to her, "You know what I miss most of all?" "What?" asks Juanita. "Sex," says Don Carlos. Juanita laughed and exclaimed, "You horny old man, but you couldn't get it up even if they pointed a gun at your head." "I know," he said, "but I would love for a woman to hold it for me, if only for a while." "I can help you with that," said Juanita, and she unzips his zipper, gently takes out his thing, and holds it in her hand. Don Carlos's face was one of sheer pleasure. They agreed to meet secretly in the garden every night, where they would sit and chat, and Juanita would hold his son during that time. One night, however, Don Carlos did not appear at their garden hideout at the agreed time. Alarmed, Juanita began looking all over for him to make sure he was okay. She ended up finding him sitting on the edge of the swimming pool next to Catalina, an 85-year-old woman who was holding his thing. Absolutely furious, Juanita screamed at him, "You traitor! What does that Catalina have that I don't?" The old man looked at her and said, "Parkinson's." Two young boys, both from well-to-do families, were talking. First boy, "Our new French maid is a robot." Second boy, "A robot? Maids aren't robots." First boy, "But ours is—" "I overheard my dad telling one of his golf buddies that he screws her ass off every Saturday." The husband leans over and asks his wife, "Do you remember the first time we had sex together over 50 years ago? We went behind the village tavern where you leaned against the back fence and I made love to you. Yes, she says. I remember it well. Okay, he says. How about taking a stroll around there again, and we can do it for old time's sake? Oh, Jim, you old devil, that sounds like a crazy, but good idea. A police officer sitting in the next booth heard their conversation and, having a chuckle, he thinks to himself, I've got to see these two old-timers having sex against a fence. I'll just keep an eye on them so there's no trouble. So he follows them. The elderly couple walks haltingly along, leaning on each other for support, aided by walking sticks. Finally, they get to the back of the tavern and make their way to the fence. The old lady lifts her skirt, and the old man drops his trousers. As she leans against the fence, the old man moves in. They erupt into the most furious sex that the policeman has ever seen. This goes on for about 10 minutes while both are making loud noises and moaning and screaming. Finally, they both collapse, panting on the ground. The policeman is amazed. He thinks he has learned something about life and old age that he didn't know. After about half an hour of lying on the ground recovering, the old couple struggle to their feet and put their clothes back on. The policeman is still watching and thinks to himself, this is truly amazing. I've got to ask them what their secret is. So, as the couple passes, he says to them, excuse me, but that was something else. You must have had a fantastic sex life together. Is there some sort of secret to this? Shaking, the old man is barely able to reply, 50 years ago, that wasn't an electric fence. A girl takes her big fat cat to the vet. My cat is very fat, she says. All right, says the vet, I will look at him. The vet picks up the cat and examines its teeth. Then she looks at its eyes, then into its ears. Finally, she turns to the girl and says, I'm very sorry, I'm going to have to put your cat down. Oh no, because he's so fat? Yes, says the doctor. My arms are very tired. A handsome young lad went into the hospital for some minor surgery, and the day after the procedure, a friend stopped by to see how he was doing. The friend was amazed at the number of nurses who entered the room in short intervals with refreshments, offers to fluff his pillows, make the bed, give back rubs, etc. Why all the attention? The friend asked. You look fine to me. I know, grinned the patient. But the nurses kind of formed a little fan club when they all heard that my circumcision required 27 stitches.